Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, Hezbollah terrorists are no longer safe in Lebanon. Israel has reportedly assassinated several Hezbollah leaders and terrorists, including 2 senior commanders of elite units in the Iranian proxy army. Lebanese security officials have confirmed that Wissam al-Tawil, the deputy head of Hezbollah's covert Radwan commando force, was killed along with other terror operatives in a targeted missile strike. Dozens of other Hezbollah terrorists have met the same fate, including the terror group's drone commander in southern Lebanon. The precision attacks on pro-Iran terrorists operating inside of Lebanon have dealt a significant blow to the Tehran-backed guerrilla army, which poses a serious threat to the Jewish state. Hezbollah has fired hundreds of rockets, drones, and anti-tank missiles into Israel since October 7th, prompting the evacuation of 80,000 residents from communities in northern Israel.
The Hamas military infrastructure has been destroyed in the northern Gaza Strip. 3 months after the devastating October 7th onslaught in which Hamas terrorists massacred 1,200 people and abducted 240 others, the Israel Defense Forces announced it has completely dismantled Hamas's military framework in the northern part of the coastal enclave. Israeli troops will now focus on eliminating the terror group from central and southern Gaza, which are full of terrorists operating in a vast network of underground tunnels. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said the mission to eradicate Hamas will take time, but there are no shortcuts when it comes to fighting terror. He explained that Israel is working according to a plan to dismantle the Iranian proxy army, secure the return of the hostages, and fortify southern Israel.
Israel's Minister of Intelligence Gila Gamliel says that Iran is behind Hamas's war with Israel, as well as many other conflicts that are engulfing the Middle East. In an exclusive interview with the Jewish news syndicate, Gamliel said that Hamas's October 7th massacre would not have been possible without the vast support Iran provides to its proxy, Hamas, in Gaza. She said the fingerprints of Iran can be found on every conflict now underway in the Middle East, from Gaza to Lebanon to the Red Sea.
The Israeli army has uncovered proof of Iran's direct involvement in the development of cruise missiles by Hamas in Gaza. IDF troops found a guided missile factory during a raid of Hamas facilities near Gaza City. They also discovered equipment used to create sophisticated, precision-guided weapons that would dramatically upgrade the terror group's capabilities. The IDF released images of the munitions along with a statement saying that it proves that Hamas terrorists studied how to build and operate precision components and strategic weapons under Iranian guidance.
U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was in Saudi Arabia last week, where he met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to discuss establishing relations with the Jewish state. Negotiations for the Royal Kingdom to join the Abraham Accords were abruptly halted after the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, but Blinken remains optimistic that they can be restarted. After the meeting, he said that the Saudi leader expressed a clear interest in establishing ties with Israel.
Israeli airstrikes against Iranian weapons shipments and terrorists operating in Syria have become more frequent and more precise. Several intelligence officers in Damascus have confirmed that these targeted bombings have destroyed cargo trucks and infrastructure and killed dozens of pro-Iranian fighters in the country. One Syrian military official told Reuters that since October 7th, Israel has carried out an unprecedented wave of air raids against Iranian weapons transfers and air defense systems inside Syria.
The IDF continues to discover stockpiles of weapons provided to the Hamas terror group by state actors. The South Korean National Intelligence Service has identified North Korean parts and weapons discovered in Gaza. This revelation came just days after the IDF discovered a trove of sophisticated Chinese-made weaponry in the terror enclave. One Israeli intelligence official told The Telegraph that this is top-grade weaponry and communications technology that Hamas didn't have before, especially on such a large scale.
2 Palestinian doctors and a male nurse have been detained for their suspected involvement in a recent terror shooting that claimed the life of an Arab-Israeli man in Samaria. The trio reportedly implicated themselves during the initial investigation of the incident near the Jewish community of Ateret. Authorities believe the group intended to target Jews in the biblical heartland.
The remaining Hamas terrorists who are hiding in tunnels in Gaza are being aided by civilians. The Iranian-backed terror group has turned the coastal enclave into a tactical nightmare, with its vast system of underground tunnels, its use of human shields, and its network of civilian observers, including children and women pushing baby carriages. One IDF officer told the Jerusalem Post that some of the observers will stand on the roofs of houses or under the cover of buildings without weapons, but armed with telephones and walkie-talkies, which they use to alert the terror leaders of IDF operations.
Joshua's altar, located on Mount Ebal, has once again been vandalized and damaged by Arab rioters. In this latest incident, Arabs spray-painted a Palestinian flag and slogans in Arabic on the holy stones of the shrine. This site is revered by Jews and Christians and has been repeatedly desecrated by Arabs. Last year, the Palestinian Authority attempted to block Jewish access to the holy place by constructing a residential neighborhood and a road on top of the biblical Mount Ebal. Jewish groups are organizing a campaign to establish an agricultural farm or a permanent Jewish community at the location to safeguard the site from further acts of vandalism and desecration.
Israel's national women's water polo team has been banned from wearing or displaying symbols calling for the release of the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Team Israel entered the opening games of the European Water Polo Championships wearing Hebrew dog tags and yellow armbands to raise international awareness about the captives who were abducted by Hamas terrorists from Israel on October 7th. The European League ordered the team to remove the symbols, causing shock and outrage among the Israeli athletes and their coaches. The Israel Water Polo Association filed a formal complaint with the European Aquatics Federation and requested that the athletes be able to show support for the kidnapped at upcoming events.
More than 3 million tourists, half of them Christians, visited the Jewish state in 2023 before the outbreak of the war with Hamas on October 7th. Tourism from the United States was at an all-time high before Iran's proxy genocidal army infiltrated Israel on that fateful day and massacred 1,200 people and kidnapped 240 others, taking them to the Gaza Strip. The invasion prompted many airlines to cancel their routes to Israel, while most hotels opened their doors to Israeli refugees expelled from their homes in the Gaza envelope and northern Israel. Some airlines have now resumed flights to the Holy Land, and Israel's tourism minister, Chaim Katz, expressed optimism that visitors will return to the Jewish state. He noted that many travelers postponed their reservations rather than canceling them because they still intended to come to Israel. Katz said, "We are looking forward to once again welcoming tourists to our beautiful country."
Israeli scientists studying the effects of the Earth's magnetic field have proven the biblical account of the battle at Gath by Hazael, the king of Aram. Researchers from 4 of Israel's top universities have developed a breakthrough technology to measure the magnetic field in burnt materials. The Israeli institutions published an article in PLOS ONE scientific journal, which explains that by applying thermal demagnetization to archaeological materials, they were able to determine the intensity of the fire and the scope of the destruction at Gath, which was the largest and most powerful city in the land at the time. Some archaeologists have disputed the biblical account of the destruction of the city, claiming that it had collapsed over several decades rather than being conquered and burned by the Damascene king in 830 BCE. The scientists discovered that all bricks at Gath held the same magnetic orientation and concluded that the city was destroyed at once. By doing so, they verified the scriptural narrative in this book of 2 Kings, which describes the Aramean siege led by King Hazael against the Philistine city.
Hundreds of Christian students descended on Washington, D.C. to advocate and pray for the safe return of the hostages held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza. The young Christians donned T-shirts proclaiming their solidarity with Israel and participated in the march organized by Passages. This program aims to educate American Christian youth about Israel and the Jewish people and encourages them to travel to and become advocates for the Jewish state. The group met in front of the U.S. Capitol building, holding signs with pictures of the hostages, and collectively prayed for their safe return. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned now for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. We're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Dr. Inon Schenker. He is the founder of A Million Bells. Dr. Schenker, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell our viewers a little about what is A Million Bells.
Look, what we have experienced on the 7th of October is something that shook the Israeli community. I think most international community as well, if they are on the side of humanity and not evil. 1 million bells is a solidarity effort to have a chance for everyone to actually participate actively in a small token of standing with Israel and supporting that through ringing a bell.
So you have it for this weekend. This is the big weekend, right? You have it in countries all over the world that they're going to actually ring a bell at the same time?
Indeed. Actually, churches, fire stations, reception desks at hotels, even ringing your neighbor's doorbell. There are so many bells around us. And the simple intention also on our website, and thank you for showing that here on the show, one can ring a bell. And importantly is to add perhaps, definitely when we are talking about congregations that come together, to not just, ring the church bell, but perhaps share a prayer or some kind of a verbal token of standing with Israel. So churches from around the world and different denominations are actually taking part in this event. We are looking for 1 million bells to ring at the same time, which is the 14th of January at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, corresponding to 4 p.m. in Jerusalem. And that would be a sound that hopefully will shake the world. One bell is a sound of danger. In all times, the church bell that was ringing was actually calling everyone to give a hand and bring water to erase a fire in a building. But 1 million bells in our times, in these times, is not just a signal of standing with Israel, but it's an important united effort to promote the 3 R's in our program.
Well, it's this weekend. January 14th is now. How much of are people heeding the call? Are you seeing all over the world people coming together? Do you think you'll reach the million bells?
I think we'll be over 1 million bells. We have a counter on the website. That's only a very small fraction of the number of bells that would ring around the world. As I said, there are ample opportunities for ringing bells. But within the religious world, specifically Christianity, we are looking at churches from around the world, from the Philippines, from the US, from Europe, from Germany, from Poland, up to more smaller countries like Iceland and others that have not only shown an interest to participate because their heart is where this activity is all about. Look, we are ringing for 3 R's. It's to ring a bell for remembrance. We remember the 7th of October. Now, actually on the 14th, it's 100 days. And that's the reason why we are calling for this participation this weekend. And we ring also to return the remaining hostages. We are also looking for ringing a bell in terms of reclaiming a world without terrorism, without anti-Semitism, without racism, and without bigotry. So there are really very serious basic values that I think Christians, Jews, Muslims, and also others share. So there is really a united effort here.
You're a medical doctor and you deal with health issues. How much of a campaign like this is it a comfort to the victims of this terror or the families of the hostages?
They are participating as well. And definitely when we are talking about Ring to Remember, it's to remember the murdered, but also the injured, their families and their friends. 1,200 people have been murdered by Hamas atrocities on the 7th of October. But they were not only Israelis. They come from 41 different nations. And for them and their families to feel that there is a united world that takes a very small step. We are talking about ringing the bell for 60 seconds. Yes. And doing that in a worldwide effort, I think gives a lot of strength and a feeling of strengthening the resilience and not only a kind of a one-time effort.
Well, that's the good question. Is after today, when the bells ring, is this over or is this the start of something of a movement?
You have mentioned my profession in public health, and this is a volunteering effort on the side of many. The organizations that are part of this, and I mentioned this in the context of future activities, are the Israeli Foreign Ministry, United Nations for Israel, the Zionist organization, the World Zionist Organization, as well as Center for Jewish Impact, and many others who are disseminating the message and are gearing their act for this weekend and specifically tomorrow on the 14th to really make that effort.
Dr. Schenker, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
By ringing the bell, you're actually standing with Israel. By ringing a bell, you are on the side of humanity against evil, Hamas. Take that one step and make your sound be a collective sound of a world effort. We thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schenker, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now, the truth from Zion.
Much of the world believes that Israel is only fighting the Hamas terror group along its southern border and in Gaza. But the reality is quite different. The tiny Jewish state also faces constant threats from Hamas supporters in Judea and Samaria, ongoing rocket attacks on northern Israel from Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon, and cruise missiles fired at Israel from the Houthi rebels in Yemen. But the mastermind of this axis of evil is Iran. What was once a thriving Persian empire is today a radical Islamist nation that oppresses women, persecutes those who practice a different religious observance, and violently suppresses freedom of speech and expression. Iran has created a robust network of proxies which all receive support to carry out heinous, unthinkable evil acts. Bolstered with funding, training, and weapons, these proxy armies offer Iran a foothold in every part of the region. It's all part of the Ayatollah's plan to try and assert dominance and power throughout the Middle East. These demonic forces have one major objective: to obliterate the state of Israel and wipe out any Jewish or Christian presence in this part of the world. Hamas and Hezbollah have been strengthened and funded by their puppet masters in Tehran. Hezbollah controls most of Lebanon. Hamas has the Gaza Strip. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps trains and equips the fighters of these two terrorist organizations at their military-grade facilities in Iran. When these terrorists return to their homes in Gaza and Lebanon, they bring with them new tactics and military know-how, making them a serious threat to Israel.
Iran funds, trains, and supplies its proxy armies with weapons across the Middle East. Whether it be Hezbollah, Hamas, or the Houthis in Yemen, we see Iran's fingerprints behind every attack on Israel. Iran is the head of the snake.
On October 7th, the Hamas terror organization invaded Israel. These Islamic savages violently raped and massacred 1,200 civilians and took 240 men, women, and children hostage. Some of the captives were later freed in a prisoner swap. The hostages said their captors warned them that when they arrived home, they should leave the country because Hamas would return to Israel again and repeat the same attack. This is all a part of a psychological terror campaign that Hamas uses to intimidate and control their victims. The Houthi rebels in Yemen came crawling out of the woodwork following the cowardly Hamas attack on Israel. Their increased warlike actions have not gone unnoticed. The rebels have escalated attacks on tankers, cargo ships, and other vessels in the Red Sea, a move that threatens the transit route that carries up to 12% of global trade. The Houthis boasted that their attacks were carried out in solidarity with the people of Gaza, expressing their concerns over the situation and criticizing some Arab countries for their close ties to Israel. The United States organized a multinational coalition to counter the Houthi missile and drone attacks. Earlier, the U.S. Navy deployed 3 warships, the USS Carney, the USS Stetham, and the USS Mason, to keep the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait open and to respond to any attacks. Nevertheless, Houthi rebels vowed to continue their attacks on any ship carrying cargo bound for Israel. These attacks are directed by Iran as part of their strategic plan to drag Israel into an all-out war in the Middle East. Hezbollah fighters have gradually increased their attacks along Israel's northern border. The Lebanese-based terror group has been firing missiles into Israeli territory since October 8th, just one day after the outbreak of war. A number of Israelis have been killed by incoming Hezbollah rockets and anti-tank fire. In fact, some northern Israeli communities have nearly been destroyed by these attacks, although much of the attention of the international and Israeli media has been focused on the Gaza region. These attacks are ongoing as Iran's proxy army works to widen the conflict. The international community has consistently grappled with how to address state-sponsored terrorism, mainly because some are hesitant to confront Iran, who is behind all of this regional terror. And there are those who question why Iran would want to embolden and create terrorist armies in every corner of the region. Well, the answer to that is simple. The radical Islamic regime in Tehran views Israel as illegitimate. The fanatic imams feel threatened because America's closest ally, Israel, is a bastion of democracy and Judeo-Christian values in the center of a heavily Muslim Middle East, a Middle East that Iran intends to dominate. So until the rest of the world realizes the threat posed by Iran, Israel will be forced to bear the burden of this conflict. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
There is a Jewish saying which states that if you save one soul, you are saving the entire world. On October 7, when thousands of Hamas terrorists poured over to Israel, killing more than 1,300 civilians in Israel, we were very moved to hear that a particular gift of the Christian Embassy just a few months ago saved on that day more than 3,000 lives. Please have a look.
In recent years, southern Israel has faced many security challenges, which culminated in October 7th in the most devastating attack in Israel's modern history. A few years ago, I was on a visit with friends in the Eshkol region in southern Israel, where we received a security update. And as we learned about the civilian emergency first response teams, the question was raised, do you have all the equipment you need to respond in times of crisis? The answer was a complex one. We learned that due to many competing priorities and urgent needs, sometimes those requests aren't immediately addressed. And after hearing about the challenges that they face, we decided to help them acquire the gear and communication devices that they needed. The ICEJ was able to step in and fill that gap due to the generosity of our Swiss and Canadian friends. When word got out in other southern communities that the donated communication devices were a game changer, requests from other regions soon followed. I recently spoke with Amnon, the leader of the emergency first response teams in the Hof Ashkelon region, and he shared just how critical these communication devices were on the 7th of October.
ההתמודדות שלנו, אני בסוף, נגיד קצין הביטחון של המועצה, אני אזרח, עובד העירייה, עובד רשות, אני לא משטרה, אני לא צבא. בסוף, כל האזרחים ביישוב למי מתקשרים? לא למשטרה, אליי. אני מקבל טלפונים מאנשים שהם לקודים והם נלחדים עם מחבלים ואני צריך להגיע אליהם הביתה ואנחנו צריכים להילחם במקום כוחות אחרים. זה אני גר בנתיב העשרה, אני ראיתי את המחבלים גם ראשון. בסוף ראיתי את המחבלים באים ב-6:32, ראיתי את המצנחי רכיפה, הבנתי שזה מחבלים, כי מיד שהם התקרבו כבר התחיל ירי של רקטות והיה ברור שזה התקפה משולבת. ויש ירי כבר בתוך היישוב. ורצתי כאילו מהר למכשיר קשר שלי, שלכם, שאתם תרמתם ועזרת לנו מאוד. אני רק רוצה להגיד שאני בסוף, בוא נגיד שגם לא יריתי כדור אחד, אבל בצעקות שלי בקשר, שגרמו ליישובים, לרבש"צים, לצאת להגנה עם הכיתות כוננות, ניצלו 3,000 איש. לא הצליחו להיכנס ליישובים, כי הכיתת כוננות היה לה 6-7 דקות להתכונן.
כשדיברנו, אמרת שאתה צריך עזרה.
כן.
ורציתי מאוד מאוד לעזור לך. ואחד הדברים שביקשת, שאמרת שזה יעזור לך, זה ATVs עם...
כיבוי שריפות.
כיבוי שריפות.
בסוף כל השריפות הן בשטחים פתוחים. ואין לנו, זאת אומרת, גם אם יבוא הכיבוי, הוא לא יכול להגיע לנקודה, אלא רק הכלי הזריז הזה, עם ה-X ליטר מים, שאנחנו יכולים לגבות אחד את השני.
אז אני מאוד שמחה שיכולנו לפחות לעזור בחלק מה-ATV שאתה זקוק להם, ויש המון חברים סביב העולם שאני מקווה מאוד שהם יעזרו לנו להביא לך עוד.
קודם כל תודה רבה על כל מה שאתם עושים, והייתם פה, הרבה אנשים היו פה.
As you have seen, these various types of equipment the International Christian Embassy is providing can save lives. Whether it's bomb shelters, communication devices, or ATVs, I want to invite you to stand with us in this critical moment. Help us to purchase more life-saving equipment. And I know as you do this, the Lord will bless you in return. Greetings and shalom from the city of God, from Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.